Oh shit.
Alright, you ready?
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Juan, and today we're going to be talking about technical interview, both the behavioral aspects and the technical aspects of the interview. Just by a quick show of hands, how many of you guys have had a coding interview, whether it's an online assessment from a company or actually coding with a recruiter over a Zoom call? I see a bunch of hands.
Okay, that's good.
I see a bunch of hands.
That's good.
And now another quick question. How many of you guys have already taken either CS1 or object-oriented programming? Already taken it. How many of you guys are either taking it or haven't taken it yet? Okay. So today's workshop aims to be both for beginners and more advanced level coders. So we're gonna tackle different aspects of it. So just really quickly, I'm gonna go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Juan Peñuela. I'm a senior in computer science. I interned at USA last summer, and I'm returning back this upcoming summer. I'm also an incoming software engineer at BNY. I will be starting with them next fall because I'm graduating this spring.
And nice to meet you guys. My name is Jeff. I'm currently a third year computer science major. Last year, I interned at New York Stock Exchange. And this upcoming summer, I'm interning at Microsoft for the Azure program. So, fun fact: I speak 3 languages. Just a little bit about myself. Oh, what is it?
Which state?
All right, and here are some companies we interview with.
Question: which state?
Oh, which 3? I speak Mandarin, English, and also Fujianese, which is like a dialect of Chinese, but it's basically a different language.
That's pretty cool. Okay, so just a little bit of background about our technical interview experience, just because we want to let you guys know that we know what we're talking about today. We had interviews with about all of these companies with offers from USA, Jeff, I believe, Microsoft, offers from Bloomberg, BNY, Bank of America, HP, and interviews with all the others.
And if you guys have any upcoming interviews with these companies, you can feel free to ask us questions afterwards or anytime during it. It's okay with us as well. And
And
we can
speaking of
connect.
which, we would like for you guys to connect with us on LinkedIn if you haven't done so already. We are happy. I'm happy to, I don't know about Jeff, but I am very happy to answer any questions that you guys have after this workshop. I'll personally be answering the answer if you guys have questions after the workshop.
Yeah, if you guys have any upcoming interviews or anything you want to ask us about, feel free to reach out on LinkedIn or come to our future workshop because chances are we'll be here at all times.
Everybody got that?
All right, everybody got that? Move on.
Wait.
Oh, my bad. We good? Let's take your time. Don't worry. Ready? All right.
So, really quickly, let's go over what we're going to learn today. So, first of all, before we actually learn how to tackle decoding interview, we need to understand why they exist in the first place, right? Why are we learning how to reverse a linked list? Why are we learning how to reverse a binary tree? I know I'm not going to do that in the job. So why do they exist? We're also going to learn how companies pick their questions, so you guys are more prepared next time you actually go on an interview. We're going to clear a bunch of myths about software interviews. We're going to also learn about the structure of the general structure of the interviews from both the behavioral side as well as the technical side. We're going to teach you how to pick the best language based on your knowledge to tackle all these LeetCode questions and all these interview type questions. Finally, we're going to go a little bit over runtime and analyzing your own code. If you guys haven't taken CS1 and you haven't been introduced to the concept of Vigo, that's okay. We'll have a little bit of a beginner-friendly introduction as well as some advanced problems. And finally, we'll answer a couple of LeetCode questions. Again, we have questions for all levels, for beginner levels, and a little bit more advanced level as well. So let's go ahead and get started with the first things first. Why do they exist? what interviewers want to know is whether or not you're able to answer, uh, not just to answer a question, but rather to communicate with a team when you are in the workplace. So the problem-solving skills, rather than whether or not you can reverse a linked list, is how do you come to the conclusion that that's the code that you need to reverse the linked list. Some interviewers also care about data structure and algorithm knowledge, yet they care about you knowing your arrays, your strings, your hash maps, trees, and these data structures are simply tools and things that you use to solve problems in the real world. And when you communicate well with an interviewer, it tells them that you're a good coworker. You want to show them that you're a good coworker because you're not the only person in that office that's going to be coding on projects. You're going to be communicating with teams, sometimes technical, sometimes people who know what you're talking about, and sometimes you'll have to present a project that is a very technical project, but you have to present it to the business department, and they don't understand what a string is or what an array is. So those communication skills are very important. So now let's talk about how companies select their questions. So we are made to believe that just because a question appears as flagged by Bloomberg on LeetCode, that that's the question I'm going to have in the interview. How many of you guys have fallen for that before? I see that question, Bloomberg has asked it before, Google has asked it before, and maybe if I can answer that question, I will be a software engineer at Google. Well, if you haven't, it's a very common misconception. LeetCode has a bunch of problems, and they label it by company. But the truth is that the only thing that makes a question recent or not on these websites, whether it's HackerRank or LeetCode or any of those websites, it's whether or not a random interviewer happened to pick it. And sometimes, like I said, sometimes interviewers are not technical interviewers. So sometimes they just grab the easy question or the medium question and they just have their candidates to solve it. But then that begs the question, how do they assess your performance in these questions? Well, it is all relative. So interviewers are not going to evaluate whether or not you're able to solve the question, but they also want to evaluate your answer, the quality of your answer, against all the other candidates. So you're not being evaluated on whether you got the question right or wrong. You're being evaluated on how well you answered that question compared to all the other people who applied for that job or to all the other people who actually got that interview.
And I'll go over like kind of like a general structure of a technical interview. As we know, oftentimes a technical interview only lasts about 45 minutes to an hour, and it's usually about 2 to 3 rounds throughout your entire recruiting process. Sometimes maybe even more if you are applying for a full-time role. But for internship, typically it's about 2 to 3 rounds. And for internship, it's normally about LeetCode easy to medium. You're unlikely to see hard question unless your recruiter hates you. But other than that, easy medium is all you're gonna see. And the first 15 minutes is probably gonna be based off of your resume and behavioral problems, right? And the amount of time you should be taking to solve and answer these LeetCode questions for easy level, 10 to 15 minutes on tops. Like if you're taking 25 minutes to reverse a string, you might be doing something wrong. But it's okay, we can teach you how to make that correct today. And then for the behavioral section, from my experience, it has always been more important than the technical side. So I've interviewed with Bloomberg, I believe there was a total of 3 rounds. On the second round, I didn't even finish solving the LeetCode problem, but I ended up still getting an offer through them because I think I did really well on the behavioral side. So if you realize you struggle on the technical side, behavioral side might be your clutch. And I'm always that person, that kind of clutch on the behavioral side. So it's always about common questions like scenario based. Tell me about a time you have a conflict with a teammate. Or it could be a resume question. Can you go more in depth about your role at insert place that you worked at, right? Or personal based. What is your biggest weakness? I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen those common interview style questions. And I've seen them a lot. There are times interviewer will go twist them a little bit, but a lot of time they stick with the paper and general guideline on how they ask those questions. So what should I do in this case? So in my personal experience, I think it's really important. I have 3 tips. Make small talks. When you first hop on that Zoom call or Teams call, right? Make small talks. What I like to do is I like to ask where the interviewer is located. So, for example, if he's located in New York City, right? You can ask him, hey, what's there fun to do in New York City? It's about befriending your interviewer. This is not a test. You're trying to get to know this interviewer a little bit. You're trying to befriend him, and he will likely be like, okay, I could see myself working with this person. Because a lot of times your interviewer will be your future manager or your future coworkers. That's going to be on the team you're put on. So at my time at New York Stock Exchange, the only reason why I think I got in, I didn't even do the LeetCode. They told me I was supposed to do 2 LeetCode problems. I ended up talking to him about Filipino culture for the entire interview. And he was like, all right, I'll see you in the summer. That's literally how it is. Sometimes when you do super well on the behavioral side, they don't even want to test on your technical side because they know they could teach you everything. They can't teach you a personality, but they can teach you a skill. So a lot of time behavioral is important as well as the LeetCode side. Can you go back? So second thing is find common ground. Like I said, I talked to him about Filipino culture, hobby, sports. Have you guys watched? Any of you guys watched the college football championship last night? Any of you? If you did, that could be a talking point. Like, let's say your manager's into football, any other sports, or interest in general. And a lot of time you want to answer your behavioral question in the STAR method. Who's here has seen or heard of STAR method? Okay, majority of us. So I'm sure we're going to.
Wait, what does the STAR method stand for?
Situation, task, action, result.
Hey,
we got prizes. We got prizes.
So let's go over kind of like what the STAR method. So we're going to answer the question. Tell me about the time you had a conflict with your teammate. That's the question we're going to go through. So what the situation, this is my answer to one of the interview questions. During an internship, a teammate was struggling with deadlines due to unfamiliarity with key technology, creating bottlenecks for the team, right? So we kind of give them this context, be like, okay, what's going on? Because if you're straight up diving into the problem, the interviewer is going to be like, okay, what am I on? You got to give them a little bit of context. Like when you're telling a story to your interviewer, you got to give them a little bit of context. What's going on? What's the problem, right? Because oftentimes, a question that requires you to use STAR typically arises with a problem or some sort of key task you're trying to complete, right? And then now the task is resolve the conflict by supporting the teammate's growth, ensuring the team meets the deadline. So that's our task, right? We're trying to make sure our teammate to meet the deadline. And then action. So I did some one-on-one session with the teammate. I was like, hey, this is not really working out. Let's see if we can work through this together. So we have some one-on-one session. I mentor him a little bit, and I teach him about how to use these technology, right? And that helped us really balance out the workload because if you guys have group project experience before, sometimes there's that one teammate doesn't really contribute much, but not all the time, not because they don't want to do anything. Maybe it's because they don't know how to do something. But in this case, I taught him how to use this technology, and I think he really started contributing more after that. And with the result, we want to let the interviewer know what we did, now the result, what positive came out of it. The teammate gained some confidence, the team meets its deadline, and the experience strengthened collaboration and problem solving skills. So you kind of want to tell your interviewer what positive came out of it, right? Because you told them the problem, you told them how'd you fix it, now what are the results coming out of it? It's like that guideline kind of had to go through. So with prepping interview, a lot of time when you guys get that interview, you're like, okay, I have LeetCode. When do I start, right? I'll start in 3 weeks. That's what I told myself. Never did it. I'll start in next week. Never did it. My interview's tomorrow. I'll look at a solution tomorrow, right? And that's what happened. You don't have a job, which is what happened most likely nowadays with a lot of people not prepping for these interviews, right? So on how to prep this technical interview, I'll hand over to Quan. He's really good at it. He has a lot of offers, which I know he knows how to solve some LeetCode problem. He will show you guys how to go through a technical problem.
Okay, but before we move on to that section, I want to clarify if you guys have any questions. I want to open it up for like maybe 2-3 questions.
Yeah.
Before we move on to the next section, because I know that was a lot of content to take on. So, any questions?
Any questions about? It can be about the content. I know it's pretty simple with behavioral. You guys can ask me about my experience or anything like that if you guys want.
How excuse me, how efficient was the STAR method for you when you got your USAA internship?
So the STAR method is actually very efficient because it gives you a structure. And one thing that Jeff said that I want to make emphasis on is tell a story. Is not only whether or not you can solve a technical question, but how you did, how you approach a problem not just for yourself, but a problem that you had with a teammate maybe, um, a problem that you had, maybe, you couldn't find a library or maybe a server that you wanted was too expensive for that project. There's a lot of factors that play into telling that story. So when you use the STAR method, what the STAR method does is give you a framework for how you're supposed to tell your story to be concise and to be to the point.
And I'll add on a little bit to that. Don't stick yourself. The STAR method is just meant to help to have a mental structure. Don't try to force yourself into that structure, because oftentimes you will find your communication with your interviewer very kind of buggy in a way, where it's like you're saying one thing and then you're moving on to the next. It's not a continuous conversation. An interview is always a conversation. You're trying to talk to this recruiter. You don't talk to your friends in a way where I'm going to structure what I'm going to say, right? You're kind of bouncing off from what your friend's saying, and same thing, you're trying to befriend this recruiter. So think of it as a conversation, but at the same time, the STAR method will help you kind of create that structure of what you're going to say next, right?
Any other questions? Yes.
For a question like about your weak spots, what would be an example answer for that?
For your what?
For a question asking, if the interview asks you about your weak spots.
So the best thing you can do is tell them that you have a weakness, because nobody wants someone so egocentric that they think they don't have any weaknesses. So go ahead and say something. I mean, the one that I always like to go with is I like to take a lot of work by myself. So sometimes it's a little bit hard for me to work with a team because I like to take a lot of the responsibility myself, which is true. And don't phrase that only as in a weakness, but focus also on how you are working on that part of yourself.
Right. And it's like, with like, you want to show them that you want to improve. Like, you tell them a weakness, but you can also tell them, this is how I'm going to improve it. So they see that it's that growth mindset they want to see out of you. Because they know they could teach you everything technical, but they can't teach you a mindset, like I said. So it's about showing them that your curiosity, you want to learn, you have that drive, and you want to improve yourself. That's the whole thing you want to show to your interviewer.
Okay, so I have time for one more question. Right? Okay, move on. So this is a small framework that I wrote for helping you prepare with your coding interviews. So it's more of a cycle, as you can see, and I really want to make emphasis on the red ones, right? So we have creating big projects here, maybe creating a website. If you're a sophomore or maybe even a junior, a portfolio is a good project. Maybe you can do a little bit of React, a little bit of Angular, learn how to host that, even if it's in something like GitHub Pages, maybe a little bit of AWS for hosting those projects. Create something that gives you stories. Before you tell an interviewer a story with the STAR method, you need to have stories to tell. So by creating big projects, you create stories for yourself. And this also helps you build your resume and, like I said, your portfolio. The best project that I can recommend if you're just starting to apply for internship is create a portfolio, because not only it works for you as a project, but it also helps you have a platform where you can show people and show the world what your personal brand is like. Then target companies based on your skills. Computer science is a really, really huge realm. It's not just coding, it's not just software engineering. There's web development, there's AI, machine learning, robot vision, server system software. There's a lot of things. And you need to focus on what you like and what you want to do. So target those companies based on your skills. For example, let's say I want to go into machine learning. Maybe I need to learn a little bit more Python so I can have experience with those libraries, maybe some machine learning models. Or maybe I want to be a web developer, a front-end developer. So maybe I have to polish up on those React and JavaScript skills. Basically, tailor yourself for what you want to do. And then that's when you start reviewing your general data structures and algorithms. And this is when you start practicing your questions for your lead code questions. And once you know how to solve some lead code questions, then you go ahead and practice big O runtime and space complexity, because that is a technical way that we communicate with interviewers and that we communicate with our team to analyze our own code. Do mock interviews with your friends, ask each other lead code questions. If the best way to practice is with somebody else, that also helps you hold yourself or hold each other accountable. And then apply to companies, and then just start all over again. And each time you go through this cycle, just do it better. Just do it a little bit better until you eventually get that dream job, that dream offer, or whatever you want.
And I want to add a little bit onto with the mock interview. When you take your mock interview, make sure you do it formally and you take it seriously. I know a lot of time when your friends do mock interview, you're like, okay, this is just my friend. I'm not going to take it seriously. When you actually sit in an interview, that nerve is going to bite you the moment you start that interview. A lot of people, they told me, they're like, I'm not nervous at all for this interview. I'm not nervous the day before. But they log into that Teams meeting, they start getting nervous. So really try to take it seriously and make sure you feel that nerve. So when you actually log in to that Teams meeting, you'll be okay with it. And a little bit more on the big project. NightHacks also have project launch program. If any of you guys are in it, that will also help you create a lot of good project for your resume. Like 2 of my biggest projects are coming out of the project launch program. I did it last spring, and I'm also doing it this spring. So,
by the way, all this material will be up on GitHub. It's already up on GitHub if you want to go see it in the workshops, the NightHacks workshops repo. You go under the 2024-2025 section, then you go under the Hello World, and then you'll find all the material for this presentation, as well as some code that we'll show you guys later. So now I want to tackle a very important question. How do I know what's the best language to solve my lead code questions in? What's the best language?
Python.
Python.
Python. I'm
Okay.
a Python believer and I'm a Python lover. Any other answer is wrong.
Wrong.
Okay, you're wrong. Next.
Oh, whoa. Okay.
Okay, maybe Java. Okay, maybe Java's too wordy, so probably not. C++, though I don't hate myself. I don't have to say C++ in an interview. JavaScript, maybe. JavaScript, maybe if you're a front-end developer, if you're applying for a front-end role, might be helpful. But JavaScript has so many weird libraries and so many weird ways to handle things. So maybe it's not the most efficient one. Rust. Anybody here knows how to even write Rust? Yeah, no, I didn't think so. Okay.
Anyone raise your hand? Never mind.
Okay. Maybe C#. Again, I don't hate myself, so probably not. What about TypeScript? No, the correct answer is no. Next. So let's talk about picking a language. Most interviewers don't even care what language you're coding in, as long as you're comfortable. Python, it's a really good tool, but my personal opinion is Python is a double-edged sword, because Python has so many libraries and Python has so many methods that some of us don't even understand. And maybe I use a method that made my question super easy and I was able to solve the question in 2 seconds. Awesome, right? But then the interviewer asks the follow-up question. Okay, what's the runtime of your solution? And you don't understand what's going on under the hood. So you just basically shut yourself in the foot because you can't answer the question anymore. I personally prefer Java because I understand a little bit better what Java is doing under the hood. But if you're comfortable with Python, if you can dominate that double-edged sword, that's great. A couple things that will help you pick a language. Use a relatively common language that you feel comfortable and you understand. Again, the most common ones are Python and Java. And avoid any languages that will make you do any extra work, please. I know this sounds obvious, but it's not. I've seen people try to use C in their interviews. And the second they have to allocate memory for their linked list, and they have to code up their entire linked list because C doesn't have a linked list library, then their whole interview is going downhill. So avoid any kind of languages that make you do any extra work.
Right.
Any questions on that, how to pick a language? Okay, awesome. Moving on.
And also try to avoid relying on the language's library, where I've seen people taking an interview, the whole question itself is about sorting, but they use merge.sort. And then next thing you know, we're done. Like the interviewer is not gonna want you to rely on those libraries. So learn your fundamental data structure and algorithms and then go about picking a language.
Because again, they care about you having problem solving skills, not coding skills. Coding skills can be easily acquired. If you want to learn a library, you can just go on Geeks for Geeks and figure out what library you need for that problem. What they really want of you is problem solving skills, and that's what you have to focus on. So my advice is to start by using pseudocode. Just pseudocode it, and again, Python is the closest thing you will have to pseudocode, so it's a really great language to start with. But just make sure that you understand fundamentally how the logic of the problem goes before you start implementing it in a language. Now, let me talk about a little framework that I have for solving coding problems, because everybody here has heard it before. I have to solve this LeetCode question. What's the most efficient LeetCode algorithm? How can I know that that I have the best, most efficient solution? So the first and most obvious one is listen. Listen to what your interviewer is telling you. If you're doing an online assessment and the problem is on that left side of the screen, and then you have your terminal on the right side of the screen, and your code editor up there, and then your test cases down here, make sure you read everything that's in that problem. Because if it's given to you, it's for a reason. Remember when you do those calculus problems, those double, triple integrals maybe, they give you information for a reason. So you're gonna have to use it. Write it down if you think it's important. Write down all the numbers, all the edge cases that you might have. Then walk through an example. When you walk through the example, you're able to see any edge cases that the problem has to offer. For example, if I'm giving a problem that passes an array of some sort, what kind of edge cases do you guys think I have to consider? Regardless of what the problem is asking. If I'm giving a list or if I'm giving an array, what are some edge cases that I will have to consider?
If the list is empty,
For example, if the list is empty, anything else?
there's only one element.
There's only one element, that's also a good one. What if the list is null? I have to handle a null value too, because they can be empty, but they can also not exist at all, right? So those edge cases are the ones that I have to handle. Let's say I get a string, but it's a string of 10 spaces. And what the question is asking is cut all the spaces. So what do I return? I just return a string, right? And sometimes we'll write algorithms that might work most of the time, but don't work on those edge cases. And that's kind of what we have to focus on. Once we already identified all the edge cases and what the problem is asking of us, we're just gonna brute force it, okay? We're gonna brute force it, maybe use 2, 3, 4 loops. It might not be the most efficient solution. It will most likely not be the most efficient solution, but it will be a solution nonetheless. And once we have a solution, that is a step forward. At this point, if you mess up the rest of the interview, but you manage to solve something here, you're already ahead of the competition, because most people are not able to solve the question. If you have a solution that is not optimal, you're still fine. You can optimize it and be top 1 applicants, but if you don't solve it at this point, it's fine, because those interviews are normally very tight on time. But once you finish your brute force algorithm, then we have to optimize it. And here, I know it's very small, but it's asking, does your solution meet the BCR? If not, then there might be room for improvement. BCR basically stands for best conceivable runtime. If they're asking me to find an element from an unsorted array, the best conceivable runtime is going to be me iterating through the whole array until I find that element. So the best conceivable runtime is what's the fastest runtime that I can possibly have without leaving out elements of the problem. Because maybe I can just sort the array, right? And then I just use binary search, that's a lot faster. But what's the best conceivable runtime? Depends on what the problem is asking. And then we walk through it. Once we have optimized our solution, we walk through it, we explain it to the interviewer. You tell the interviewer, this is how I will go about it. First thing I will do is I will sort my array, then I will do a binary search, and then I will just find the element that I need and I will return that element. And then they tell you, okay, how about you run it first? You see if it works. And if it works, awesome. If you made it all the way through here, you're good. You're probably gonna get to the next round or get the offer, whatever is the next step. But if you get to this point and then your algorithm doesn't work, it's not over yet. Once we're here, if your code doesn't work, you have to go back to all the way back to step number 3 and iterate through this process all over again. And you have, in my experience, I will say you have at least 2 or 3 iterations of this before you run out of time, because most technical interviews will give you about 30, maybe 40 minutes to solve a question. So don't run out of hope. If you get to this point and you have 1 minute left and you couldn't possibly do it, you couldn't solve it, the next thing you're gonna do is you're gonna go back to your code, you're gonna comment everything that you think you could have done to make it better, because they're gonna look at your code. They're gonna look at your code, they're gonna look at your intention, they're also gonna look at your coding style, they're gonna look at whether you document your code or not. They're gonna look at a lot more things that you think. So make sure you comment your code, you document it, you walk the interviewer through it if you're in a Zoom call or something. But that is basically how the framework should go about solving any lead code style question or interview type question. Yes.
Let's say that we get in a coding interview, right, and we can't possibly find like a good first approach to our problem, and like let's say it's like a lead code hard. What would be like the best like solution to like show some kind of like I guess work like if you can't even write code down?
So one thing that you need to understand is that it's okay to ask for hints, right? So if you feel like it's a really, really hard question and you don't know how to get started, ask the interviewer for a hint. Sometimes they will leave out details on purpose because they want you to find them. So remember that it's also a conversation between you and the interviewer, and they will probably tell you, okay, what if you do this? And they will give you a very, very vague idea of what the algorithm will be, and then you might be able to solve it. There's some questions that are really, really hard, but the answer to that is just practice. Just practice questions. Don't start practicing 1 week before the interview. Start practicing now. We'll do one problem every day if you can, but stay consistent, and you'll be fine. Any other questions?
And another big thing is pattern recognition. A lot of these leak code problems have similar patterns. So for example, you're thrown a string problem, and I'm like, okay, I have no idea what this is about. And sometimes they will add context to it. So for example, they'd be like, John owns a Amazon bookstore, have contained this amount of string, right? So with John, Amazon, these are extra details that you don't even need for the problem, but they just try to confuse you with it. So you look at the problem and you're like, okay, this is a string problem. What comes to my mind after that, right? Like, I have no idea how I solve this problem. What comes to my mind? Well, usually when it deals with string, right, there's going to be sorting. Let's say I sort the string. Do I reverse it? Or do I see what kind of elements within the string? For example, there's this one leak code problem, I think. It's like asking to find a repeating character, right? So you got to be like, which index is this repeating character is at? So kind of think in your head is like, what is the problem type? And then start kind of thinking like, what are the possible solutions that matches that type? And then go about it from there. And then if you really stuff like Juan said, it's okay to ask for hints. I remember during my second round interview with Microsoft, I was stuck. I was stumped, and I was like, I have no idea how to solve this. I asked like, can I have a hint? I still got my offers, so it is okay to ask for hints if you're really, really stuck.
Any other questions about this whole thing or anything else? Yes.
So let's say like they give you the question, you got like the idea already in your head. And so you start typing and typing, the words just keep flowing out. Do you just sit there in silence while you're typing away? Or
Yeah.
should you
No,
start talking to
bad
them
mistake.
about what you're
You want to communicate it. How would you feel if you go into a project with a senior engineer and the senior engineer just goes, he sits down and he starts coding and you're the intern trying to learn and you don't understand anything? So it's a bad mistake to not do that. It's a bad mistake to not start commenting your code. As a matter of fact, if you know the solution, that's great, but don't start with the code right away. Start with the comments first, right? Let's start with how you're going to approach the problem. So first, I will go and iterate through the array. Second, I will use an if statement to find something out. And then after you have a framework, after you have a little bit of a blueprint of what you want to do, then you start coding it and explain it to the interviewer as you go through it. It also helps you
fix any mistakes you might make along the way with your logic. Because it's a lot easier to fix English words than it is to fix code. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes.
During interviews, do you code in editor or like what do you code? Yes, or like,
So.
oh, it's just a plain editor.
So most of the time, generally speaking, first rounds are going to be in a code editor, and then you will actually have to run the code and pass the test cases. And then second to third rounds, most of the time they give you either a sheet of paper and you have to write it down if it's in person. Sometimes they like to make you whiteboard it so you can also draw it. Sometimes they will ask you to just code it up on a laptop or on a computer or whatever. But it really depends on the interviewer and what the interviewer is looking for. Does that answer your question?
And oftentimes it depends on the company. For example, Google makes you code on Google Doc. And for Bloomberg, it's going to be Codility, which is the editor, but they disable the autocomplete feature. So you kind of still have to type everything out by hand. But it will format it for you, and they won't ask you to run it, even though there's a run button. So it really depends on the company. What I recommend is going on Reddit, just start looking through the posts, and you will see, be like, what the interview structure will be like. They're not going to tell you what the question would be about. You will at least know what the format is. Like, am I coding on Google Doc? Am I coding on a Word doc? Or am I coding in an editor? Those are some good resources you could use.
Any other questions? Okay, now we're going to talk about running time of your code, right? Let's say that you and your friend are trying to execute this piece of code, but it takes on your computer, it takes 0.7 milliseconds, and in your friend's computer, it takes 1.2 milliseconds. Why is that? Next. You ran it in a really good computer. You ran that program amazingly, and your friend, he ran it on data. So that's why it takes a little bit longer for him, right? But it doesn't make sense. It's the same piece of code. So how am I going to analyze that at a much deeper level, technically speaking? Well, that's where we introduce Big O Runtime. The idea of Big O Runtime is to account for the code rather than the output time, because there's so many variables that go into evaluating the running time of an algorithm. And things like processor, I don't know, graphics card, network issues, Wi-Fi issues, all of these things are going to alter the running time of an algorithm. So that's why we rather look at the code. And the general idea, I'm pretty sure most of you guys already went over Big O Runtime on CS1 or object-oriented programming. But you look at your assignment statements, you look at your variables, you look at how many comparisons you're doing. So, for example, how many of those I less than n comparisons we're doing, and then how many arithmetic operations, how many sum plus or equal, sum times. Everybody gets it. So far, it's a very brief description of that topic.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Okay. Two volunteers. Yeah. Over here. Okay, cool. Anybody else? We need one more volunteer. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, well, just do that.
All four.
So you guys are gonna take each one problem. What's the runtime of this algorithm? Number 1. All of them. Easy, right? Who's next? of n, right? So this iterates 100 times n. We drop the constant and we keep the n, right? Easy enough. What about number two? Who's number two?
I'll be number two.
Okay.
Okay.
What's the runtime of that algorithm?
That's weird.
Why do you say it's in
Why do you
square?
say it's n squared?
Is it a nested? Oh.
It's not
I
nested.
didn't see it.
So you
Yeah,
add them. If they're nested, you multiply them.
Right.
If they're not nested, you add them.
Yeah.
Right? So that is also of n.
I'll do number three.
Okay,
Is it-
number
is
three.
it n squared?
Walk me through it. Why do you think it's all n squared?
Because it's nested.
Okay, cool. This one is also of n. Good job. Number four, who wants to try this one? This one is a little bit more challenging.
I think it's order n.
Of n. Do you want to
So,
walk me through it?
yeah, so the loop is for running it a constant amount of times, 100. So we want to look at the functions that are going on inside of it. And we see there are two functions, foo3 and foo1. Foo3 is order log n, so that runs 100 log n times.
Okay.
Foo1 runs 100 order n times, and order n is bigger than log n, so it's order n.
Okay.
Yeah. Good job. That was
Good
good.
job.
That was good.
Okay. Any volunteers for number five? You already did that one. I need one more volunteer. One more volunteer. Go for it.
Is it n cubed?
Why?
It's nested one.
It's nested 3 times, right? Okay, you're wrong.
Yeah,
It's O n squared.
yeah.
Why? Because here we're comparing, it starts at 0, goes all the way to n. This one starts at 0 and goes all the way to n. But this one, it starts at n and it goes all the way to k less than or equal to n. So this only gets executed once. So this whole for loop is actually a constant. So what is the runtime of this one? N squared. Good job. That was tricky. That was tricky. I put that
That
one.
was a tricky one. But in general cases, when you look at the code you write, there's not going to be trick cases like this. You look at your loop, and you're like, okay, I'm going to have 2 nested loops, and that would be n of squared. And if I only have 1 loop, O of n, right? That's the typical runtime. Last one, anyone?
Any volunteer for the last one? Yes.
Right there.
O of n squared?
N squared. Can you walk me through it?
Yes, if int I equals n, then I is less than n, so it goes n times. And then foo3 is O of log n, but foo1 is O of n, and so then O of n is bigger than O
This
of log n.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
This one is bigger. Uh-huh.
Yeah, that one is bigger, so it would be n squared.
Which one were the answers?
Yeah, good job. Good job, guys.
Hey.
That's good. That's
Thank you.
perfectly how you would analyze the time complexity of your code, where. Yep, I got you. So yeah, so with common time complexity, there's usually O of 1, O log n, O of n squared, and 2 of n. You usually don't want your solution in 2 of n. There's some very, very niche problem that might require that. But most of the time, your solution should be somewhere between O of 1 to O of n. And if you look at this graph right here, you can see the big difference between their runtime, right? Why we want like a efficient algorithm compared to a slower algorithm. So usually, like what Juan was saying, you want to start with a slower solution, then you optimize it, right? So typically, I usually start, depends on the problem, I could try to do like an O of n squared solution, and then I'm trying to bring it down to O of n, or best case, O of log n. That's usually the most optimal solution. But that would be more like a follow-up question, usually during your interview. I think about 70% of the time I get optimal solution, but 30% of the time during my interviews, I don't, and I still get offered through those. So it's okay if you don't get the most optimal solution, as long as they can see you clearly communicate your thought process with them, right? You don't want to just sit down and start coding, right? You know the solution, great, but they know it too. They don't want to see you code up a solution. They want to see you demonstrating the skill of communicating that solution to them, right? It's really teaching, like testing on your communication.
And okay, so most of y'all have already seen Big O runtime, but how many of you guys have been taught or have learned about the space complexity? a lot less of you guys.
Anyone, one volunteer want to answer what is space complexity?
Raise your hand. I got you. No, there's a couple more.
Yes.
I'm just picking on you.
So, it's pretty much like how much memory you can use.
How much memory? Like, how would you put that in terms of, well, the space? Like in C, they teach us in Intro to C, right? They teach us when you do malloc, you're allocating memory for something, right? In the context of Java or Python, a lot of the times that means data structures. So if I'm using an assisting array to sort elements, or if I'm using a hash map to get keys and values, that's the space complexity that we're using. And when you get to a little bit more advanced liquid problems, that's when you have to start considering the trade-off of the space complexity or runtime. So do you want a faster runtime, or do you want less space complexity? Do you want more space, and do you want less runtime? And you have to kind of find a balance between the two of them, which is the whole reason why there's not one answer fits all for a particular question. There might be many answers that are optimal and correct.
And being able to describe that trade-off is also very important. I feel like a lot of times during interviews, interviewer will be impressed if you could describe why you chose to sacrifice your runtime over space, right? Because you don't want to allocate so much space, but for such a fast runtime, then your solution is going to take up the entire database, right? So you want to be able to describe your reasoning, or why you're sacrificing like space complexity for time complexity. You want to be able to describe that trade-off. That's a very important skill to have.
Okay, so now we have a little bit of a let's call it a practice round interviews. These are very, very basic LeetCode questions, and as you can see, we have 2 questions for beginners if you have never done a LeetCode question before, and we have intermediate problems if you guys have already solved a few and you want to challenge yourself. So what I want you to do, guys, is either if you want to do it individually, that's fine. Let's say groups of 2 or 3 maximum, and we're gonna go ahead and do it either on your laptop on a notepad. I don't want to see code editors, because those give you the answer pretty much if you have GitHub Copilot or something. So we're just gonna go ahead and do text editors for now. And if you don't have a laptop, I have some paper here, which is also really good practice. Raise your hand
If you guys want to write the solution out on paper.
solution out of paper.
Anyone else want a paper, or you want to just type it out on your notepad? Okay, so who has seen these problems before? Like, have you guys done this problem before? It's okay if you did, and that's perfectly normal, because there are times during interviewer is going to give you a question that you've seen before, because you practice a lot, right? If you don't, this will be a good practice.
So the next thing is we're gonna give you guys 10 to 15 minutes to work on that question.
Right.
Write maybe 1 or as many solutions as you want. Everything goes. We can do Python, you can do Java, you can do Rust if you want, if you're crazy. You can do pseudocode, is also okay.
Yeah.
And if you have any questions, assume that me and Jeff are the interviewers and ask us for hints, ask us for help. We just want to get you guys used to the idea of practicing these type of questions.
Right.
If you're a complete beginner and you don't know how to get started, we got you. We can also teach you how to get started. All right, go ahead. Just make sure you write down which question you're trying to solve, so we actually know what you guys are doing.
Right. Just let us know which question you're solving. And we're just going to be walking around. If you need hints or anything, just raise your hand. We'll come by, and we're just going to be checking in. We're just going to spend about 10, 15 minutes on doing this problem.
For the zero matrix question, is it only like when it initially has zeros, or like, because later on you thought the matrix stuff was zeros?
So when you think about it in a way, right, a matrix, let's say you have a 3x3,
Yeah.
right? Let's say you set it to 0. The entire row and column has to be 0.
Okay.
It doesn't matter if the future impact row, right? So let's say, let me see if I have the markers. If anything, if you have markers, yeah, that would be appreciated. I feel like it's better if I visualize it for you. Oh, we got that Microsoft. I don't even have that. We can hide it. You know. Okay. Let me see. Can you see it right here? Okay. Can you see it like that? Can you see it? Okay. So let's say we have a 3x3 matrix, right? And I'm just gonna fill in some random number. Right? So we're gonna do this as 0, right? We're gonna start with that as 0. So let's say your solution is going through the entire thing. You encounter this 0. So you set the entire row
Characters go above
to
0. So if many of the characters
Right.
more than once.
So think of it, this is like kind of like a disease. It's spreading, right? So it doesn't matter if you keep going. So let's say you hit this one. You just got to know you're turning, whenever you encounter 0, you're turning the entire row and column into 0. So it doesn't matter if your future input got turned into 0, because it will still activate whatever the algorithm mechanism you're supposed to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah. That would be our solution.
Huh?
That would be our solution.
I don't know. You tell me. You're supposed to come up with the solution.
No, but that would be the output that we're supposed to achieve.
No, your output should be, I think, what was the question again?
Zero matrix.
Okay, so your output should be entirely 0, like entirely 0 matrix. So this will be your output.
That's the only bad, like, yeah, you have so many good markers. Yeah.
So let's say you're having input like that, your output should be equivalent in terms of the size, right? But all your thing should be 0. This should be your output.
Okay, so let's say at the beginning, you start off with 0 in the middle. Once you hit that 0, you still continue iterating through the rest
Right.
of it. Okay.
Yeah, you could continue, but it's up to you how you want to do it, because then let's say you hear, but there's still some stuff that aren't 0. That means your algorithm is wrong. So it's up to you how to figure out how to turn this matrix that's originally not 0. It might contain some 0, right?
If it has no zeros, then it should just be.
I don't know. You tell
What do you
me.
mean?
That's an edge case that you would consider about. So that's good thinking right there, right? She's thinking like, okay, what if the input doesn't contain 0? Then here's your time to be like, hey, what if the input that you ask the interviewer, what if the input doesn't contain 0, right? That's how you discover edge cases. So then the interviewer will be like, okay, then just return null. Like you just ask them, what do I do here? And they will usually give you a solution, right? But here should be your result, which is all 0, a matrix with all 0 matrix. Wait. So, walk me through, what do you think?
Okay, because you just.
Okay, so. That's a good start. I mean, you probably have to check every. So, but that's a good start. But how do you set up that message to a way where all your unique and if you need a hint, just raise your hand. So we're gonna or it's bigger than you know how to set up right? Yeah.
I don't know what to do. What is this? I don't know. I'm so confused. Like, what am I supposed to do here? Basically, we're just making it so that the whole thing ends up being 0, but we can't. I just have it all 0. Yeah. Can you just check each spot individually if there is no 0? Then don't change anything. If there is no 0.
Yeah, because okay, let's say you turn a zero into center. You turn the plus into zero, so this is the next thing. That one's this range.
Yeah.
Then you go down to here.
Yeah, you go down there. Yeah.
You turn this to zero.
Yeah.
Do this turns into zero.
No, this one goes, this goes, this one, but yeah, this, the top left and I'm gonna stay the same. But,
But it ends with
no, one pick another problem.
Okay, how about what's a beginner? Okay, let's do this. Which one do you want to do? Just the first one.
It's an easy. So they have all the
Okay, so how do you want to do this? You want to do?
That's okay.
So we would have to go through the whole string, and we would have to figure out if any character has appeared before. If it has appeared before, then automatically it goes straight. But how we need to make a list of every character and check through that.
So let's make a variable called character.
Okay, it's keeping track of
One.
what is the. Okay, so
I haven't coded in Java in so long.
I know you have, I know.
And I don't know how to code.
We don't know C.
Fair.
I'm fine, you know C.
Okay. Yeah, you're definitely gonna get this. It's definitely about looking through the logic. Yeah, makes sense.
Have you ever used a switch case?
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I have, but I only use it in
Not that.
I've used it,
I like our brute force solutions are totally okay. Matrix.
Okay, let's just do
don't
it
make
first.
problems scary.
yeah,
Do you know Java?
I do know Java, yes, I'm not that good, because it's been a while.
Okay, so then let's go.
So don't let those problems scare you. If the array is equal to 0. Okay.
That's
I feel like
something
you're-
that's
you're-
used in
doing
Java.
good all the way up here. Yeah.
Yeah.
They completely goes out. It's totally you can write as many as you like.
They don't give us a string.
Okay. And that also helps you clean up your cuts. Also, like, it's just a method to like go through, go to backtrack and maybe. Oh, okay, I should do that. Cool.
How, is there any function that can be, is there any method in Java that can be, where we can calculate what has, if this, like, and in Python, it's like, if there is a string.
I'm working on
If you're in a
Yeah, it's like, it would be like, yeah, if I were to do like,
Okay.
so let's just say there was a,
So basically iterated through matrix.
this is a, something that you can do, this is a built-in, so you can do like, if, and there was a string called like apple. There's a contain. Yeah. Oh, there's a contain. I can't. That's how you do it in Python. Where like if A now is true, so you can do that. So basically, how I would code this in Python is I would add basically to our training like use, I would add every time I would add a letter, I would check if this letter has already appeared. And if it has appeared, I would break. And I would like, okay, return false or
They're not on the.
when I just add it to the
So maybe the model.
I would check first.
How you guys doing over here?
Check first, and then add it.
Good. How you doing?
Use the first one.
First one? Okay.
Yeah, I know I have to look at if else statement.
Like, you guys do the gestures, so now you like, and then.
Whatever,
Are you using any assistant data structures maybe to count the amount of times?
so it would be like.
A random
Base,
character
base.
in that sequence, so like, how do you know
Yeah,
that
yeah,
there's?
basing is necessary.
You could use an array could work, how would you go about using an array that, that problem?
Then like, is there like a break?
I'll let you think through it. How you doing?
Yeah, do return false, sorry. Return false.
Double throws look good.
And that's automatically kind of.
So this one.
Yeah, that's
This
what
is a good approach, because how do you know
Else,
that after you do this,
um,
then the next
you
time you're
just
gonna find a
add,
zero in the next row,
like,
or in the same row?
I don't know how to add it.
Converting already, so eventually you're gonna end up with a matrix full of zeros, right?
Or is
So
it
how
for
do you go
things
about,
that
about,
use
about
plus?
solving that? About getting to that,
It usually
that
was used
barrier
plus,
of, I don't wanna end up with a matrix.
use, yeah, plus equals, in that letter.
I'll give you a pro tip, using a system data structure.
I'm sure you didn't know. I'm kidding.
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe. We don't talk about that.
Don't worry about doing Python. It's much better if you think through the logic first. And
What
then
are my
see
any
how
terms being
Python is really good as far as it's very similar to pseudocode, but don't be afraid to pseudocode it if you don't know. And then if it's not a library, write it as a system method. That's a little bit more option, right?
Yeah, because this I'm trying to print it out to two decimal places, but it won't, it opens up the whole thing because I don't know, I have no clue how to figure it out. And two decimal. I don't know.
Oh my god, so you already spoke the other. Okay, we'll come back. Okay. So which one is your?
Is yours a one?
It's a double.
So you do percent.
Yeah, no, don't worry about it.
Wait, just back to Let's get and ask on Thursday.
I think I'm missing it.
All right, guys, we got 2 more minutes. 2 more minutes.
Okay, that can work. It is, yeah, that's predictable, yeah, but just stuff like that. So now you're in the third step of the process, right? So now instead of doing a double format, there's a pairs of letters. What if we use a to store that data? Right? And then that might be a little bit more complicated. So you have to, like, and that's one of your other important personalities. All I want you to do is optimize it so you can become more.
Oh, okay. No.
Okay. All right. All right, y'all.
Time out.
Time out. We're ready. We're ready to
Good
start.
job, everyone. I saw everybody try at least one question, and that's awesome. Now let's talk about some of the solutions, right? Because like I said, there's more than one solution to each question. So let's talk about some potential approaches for each one of them. Very quick. Let's just start with is unique. This is just, again, I went ahead and I wrote the comments first, right? The structure of the logic, and then I wrote the code. So the way I did this one was using the ASCII characters. There was one or two people who was using ASCII characters to solve this one. That's a good approach because it's very, very optimal. It's very, very efficient because accessing ASCII characters is as easy as typecasting on the language that you're in. You can do that in pretty much any language.
I think I saw some solution with hash map and sets. Those are really good as well.
Those are really good. And then that's when the other question that we were asking earlier kind of comes into play. I'm using a hash map, so it's more space, but it's also a faster algorithm, so it's okay, right? But the way I did this one, I also used an existing data structure to hold 256 booleans. And the reason that I have 256 is because that is the amount of valid characters that I'm going to have, if it's lowercase, uppercase, or numbers, right? So maybe that's a good question to ask your interviewer. So in the input string, can I assume that I'm only going to have English letters, or can I assume that I'm going to have only lowercase letters? All those things that help you clear out any edge cases are good things to ask. And then you iterate through the string. If you have already found this letter on that set, because this is kind of a set that I'm creating, then you return false because that means there's a duplicate. Otherwise, you set the current flag to true. The flags go into this array. And if the code makes it all the way down here, then it's just true. This is a little bit more, this is the most efficient. The ones with hash maps are a little bit slower, but are also okay.
Is there any question that you guys want us to go over specifically? Because we don't want to go over a solution where no one did. Like, is there any solution?
No, everybody, at least one person solved
Okay,
solved
I
the
gotcha.
question. Now, hang on. There's a couple other solutions that I saw out there. I saw you try this one to compare each character against each other. That gives you O(n) squared, right? Because you're iterating through kind of two nested loops to see the whole string. So that's okay. That can work. It's just a slow. Like, imagine they give you a string that has 1,000,000 characters. Then it's gonna take forever to run that, right? And the other one that I saw, actually no, I did not see anybody do this one because this one is
This one is kind of interesting. I saw like one person trying to go for that approach, but they couldn't quite figure it out. Is to sort the string and check the characters that are neighboring each other. So you sort the string, so all the A's are going to be at the beginning, then all the B's, then all the C's, and then it can just count if there's more than one of that character. Any questions as far as this one? Using beginner. Okay, moving on. Zero matrix. Raise your hand if you tried zero matrix. I saw a lot of people did. Okay, a bunch of people, you guys did this, and all of you guys, I asked every single one of you guys all ran into the same problem, where you were just iterating through the matrix, all good, and then whenever you find a zero, you just set that row and that column to zero, right? Easy enough. But then you run into the problem of, what if I already set that row to zero, so the next index that I take and I find a zero, then it's just gonna zero everything out, and I'm just gonna end up with an array full of zeros. That is the problem that I saw a lot of you guys running into. And the way you get past this, and I told you to use an existing data structure, is you do a second matrix, right? A second matrix that has the same amount of rows and columns, and then you iterate through the first array and you just flag whatever you have a zero. And after you flag each zero, then you iterate through the first one and you know which rows to zero out. It's a little bit, this one is a lot trickier, but that's kind of the approach that you can go for there. So now, if you do that approach, you're gonna have a m times n runtime, because you're iterating through a matrix that has m columns and n rows. And you will have a O of n space complexity if you wanna go with that far, because you're using one assisting array or one assisting matrix as a data structure. Any questions about this one? Okay, next. Check permutation. Did anybody try this one? I think like one person tried that one. Well, anyway, if you guys want to see the solutions to any of these questions, I coded them on Java and Python with detailed runtime and detailed space complexity, and some comments on the code as well. They're on GitHub. Again, the same place where you will find the material for this workshop, you can go and find the solution, both Java and Python. Okay, you can just move on. You can just move on to the next one. I don't think anybody did this one. The string compression. Did anybody try string compression?
Stop.
Do you use any of these approaches?
I use sliding window option 1.
Option 1?
Oh, no, option 3.
Sliding
three.
window.
The sliding window approach. That one tends to be very optimal. Any sliding window problems tend to be very optimal because you can look at 2 places in a string or an array, and you only have to do 1 iteration, so they get pretty fast. So this is what we were talking about earlier, coding patterns. If we have another time for a different workshop, that will be a workshop on coding patterns specifically, and we're gonna dive a lot deeper into these concepts. But do you guys have any questions about the string compression? And I also I think I asked you a follow-up question with that one, right? So what if you didn't want to have any ones in that string? If the B or any letter is only once, then I don't want to see the number 1 there. Remove that. You got around that pretty easily, which is just you adding an extra if statement. Totally valid, but some people will crash out in the interview if they got a follow-up question.
All right, so here's we're kind of closing out. So we kind of briefly summary over today. So we did behavioral interview part, and we also did a technical part. I'm sure you guys know how to approach those now. But lastly, I kind of just want to go over the mentality management portion of it. So it's very important to keep yourself calm throughout this entire interview. I think I failed like a couple interviews because I started panicking. It was supposed to be a very, very easy problem to answer, but because I panicked, I literally don't know how to answer it. Like the question was literally about what is the height of a tree, right? Like I don't even know what I didn't know a tree had height. So I mean I did, but I just couldn't remember it because I was panicking. So it's very important to stay calm throughout the entire interview. Even if you get stumped, just take a second, take a deep breath. Your interviewer won't like literally blame. They won't blame you for it. They will still pass you if you're able to come up with a correct answer at the end of the day. And kind of a little bit cover, remember, it's a conversation, it's not a test. Don't go in and just sit down and start typing, right? Make sure you communicate your solution with your interviewer. That's probably one of the most important things coming out of this workshop is, remember, always communicate, communicate, communicate. It is okay to ask for hints. And what I like to do for me when I prepare for all my interviews, I like the rubber duck method. About a rubber duck, I start talking to them like my interview. Right? I try to explain all my solutions when I do my LeetCode problem to this rubber. And I find that really, really helpful.
All right, now I want to just close out with any additional questions, feedback, thoughts as far as the workshop goes. We're just gonna open it up to you guys to hear your thoughts.
Which topics do you think are the most popular that are asked?
Arrays, linked list, strings.
Trees.
Trees are also very popular as long as they're like LeetCode. When you get to trees, that's when you're getting into like Bloomberg territory. Like they're a little bit harder.
So from what I've seen so far, most of the FANG company, they would gear towards more FANG, graph style questions, where medium-sized company like in Florida Blue, which I interview with, they usually go with array, string. So do your research. LeetCode tag questions is always a good, or ask Reddit. A lot of time they would like have answers on Reddit as well. So research the company, make sure you prep well, and I think you guys can do it. But yeah, if you guys have any other questions,
Following up, what are the hardest topics?
Graphs,
DP, dynamic programming.
graphs, dynamic programming are about some of the hardest topics you will find. Graphs is a CS2 topic. Backtracking goes a little bit into DP as well. But yeah, those are more advanced topics. Again, a lot of the times you will get that type of questions if you're applying for an entry-level role, like a new role. I remember I had a dynamic programming question. It was combined with graphs because I had to grab information from the graphs and then use like a weird version of dynamic programming to come up with a solution. That was my interview with BNY. I solved it at first, and then they asked a follow-up question, but I was really out of time. I only had like 5 minutes left. And after they asked that follow-up, all I could do was just add the comments. And because I had the comments, they kind of knew that I could solve the question potentially, and that's what got me the offer.
So that's the thing. They want to see that you're able to have that solving skill, that you actually solve.
That's why I'm trying to drill it really hard right now. Just really comment your code because it can be a lifesaver. It can be the difference between you getting the offer or not. Any other questions?
Yeah. If you have any questions that you want to ask personally, you can feel free to come up here. We'll just be here for a little
We'll
bit.
be here for a little bit, and if you don't have any questions right now, but you think of one later, hit us up on LinkedIn. Awesome.
I want to.
Originally, you guys had put up there that you guys got you said Microsoft and there was also Google up there as well. When I applied, they never even got back. How did you kind of even get to the point where did you guys have a referral or did you?
It's I would say resume building is very important.
Okay.
You have to build a very, very strong resume that stands out, and that gets you the initial assessment. And then once you have that initial assessment, then you take it from there.